And now to Avalon. So Avalon Bunge oversees our ecological restoration grant program. And she also manages Pollinate HV, the main product of which today is the Hudson Valley Pollinator Action Guide, which you're going to hear a lot about. Avalon also oversees PCA's local ecotype seed propagation work, which we're doing in conjunction with the Hudson Valley Seed Company. She'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. Prior to PCA, she directed a coastal climate resilience education initiative through NOAA's environmental literacy program. She has over a decade of farm work, both in New York State and in Canada. And she's worked with various food justice and agriculture-focused nonprofits as a development consultant. She got her BA in geology from Colgate, and she has a master's in ecosystem restoration from SUNY ESF, focusing on urban agroforestry and foraging. This summer, she began her PhD work in ecological restoration at Antioch University. Avalon lives in Gallatin in Columbia County, where she helps to steward several hundred acres of conservation land, as well as her beloved native plant gardens. So Avalon, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you again, just for all of your work for PCA. And we're very, very excited about this launch today.
Thank you so much, Bob, and Kate as well, our wonderful intern who is behind the scenes on the Zoom here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and jump in because we have a lot to jump into today. So let's do that. So this morning, we are launching the Hudson Valley Pollinator Action Guide. And I think many of you, I saw a lot of the names come up as you all were joining this morning, and many of you have been involved with this project in one way or another, or have heard me talk about it, or are excited about it, or work with pollinators. So I really feel like we're among so many friends and so many practitioners. And I am thrilled to welcome all of you. So those of you who know and those of you who don't know, this has been a project at least 3 years in the making. It's involved a lot of field work, a lot of research, a lot of science, a lot of collaboration. And it has boiled down or condensed into a still fairly dense, but I think very helpful and hopefully positive resource that we're going to share with you today, and that is the Pollinator Action Guide. So here's how we're going to do that. We are going to, I want to just give a little bit of background about the Pollinator Action Guide, because like I said, could not be here without many people and lots of effort. Then I want to just give an overview of what you will find in the action guide. So this won't be so much a like a highlight reel of actual content, but more of an orientation and sort of a direction to help you find your own path through that resource. And the guide includes background. It includes, of course, many how-tos, and then it includes 4 case studies, or sometimes you might hear me call them pilot sites, all of which were installed here in the Hudson Valley. And I see some of our pilot site managers on the call, so thank you in advance to them. Can't wait to talk about everything we did. And then we'll do questions and comments. So what I'm not going to do is spend a lot of time on doom and gloom. As Bob mentioned, we are an action-oriented organization here at Partners for Climate Action, Ecological Action, Climate Action. I think most of us here know that we are facing many threats to pollinators, both here in our Hudson Valley bioregion and globally. This is bad, but there is much that we can do. And we found that people are really ready for action. So especially in our previous ecological restoration grants, we had so much interest in doing pollinator projects, and we want to continue to support that work. We know that there's a gap in resources for really bioregional specific pollinator work, and that's what we want to do with this resource. So I'm putting all of our thank yous up front, and I could probably stay on this slide for the next 45 minutes, so I'll try not to do that. But like I said, tons and tons of people made this happen. First and foremost, a huge thanks and hats off to PCA's co-founder, Sue C., who I think is on. And if we were in person, I'd have us all give her a round of applause, because Really, none of this could have happened without Sue's vision and Sue's perseverance and just her unending positivity and commitment to pollinators and to the beauty of our earth. Thank you so much, Sue. So then there is a massive team of folks that made the science happen and made the installations happen. And you'll hear me say a lot today, we did this and we did that. I just want you to know that means some combination of the people that you see on this slide, not just me. I'm really the messenger. We had science that came from many of these institutions that you see here. In particular, the Robert Jagir Lab at UMass Dartmouth, SUNY ESF, Landscape Interactions, our consultant that you'll hear about, the New York Natural Heritage Program, and the Hawthorne Valley Farmscape Ecology. We had a wonderful co-writer in addition to myself, Ashley Gamble. Could not have done this without her. We had a whole suite of people helping with making this thing beautiful. Thanks to all of them. And then we had our case study site managers who you'll hear a little bit about later on. So that's who's behind the scenes. Now, who is this guide for? It is, of course, for all of you, and it is for anybody, that means really anybody with a garden, and that is anybody from containers on the firescape, which is how I first started gardening, up to many hundreds of acres land managers. And I've put Intrepid Beginners on its own line because certainly this resource should be accessible to beginners, but we kind of think of it as like a level 1A or a level 2 resource because there's so much out there to help get you into gardening. We don't really need another like from the ground up resource. This is sort of, okay, we've exhausted much of what we can find about native plants. Where do we go from here? So if you're an intrepid beginner, definitely check it out. But if you're in more of those expert categories, I think you will enjoy it as well. And another person or another group that this guide is certainly for, as Bob mentioned, is potential grantees. So we are a funding nonprofit. We have funded many pollinator projects through our Ecological Restoration Grant Program. We want to do that more. So if you're interested, I'll have links at the end to how to sign up for our email list. And certainly we are seeking support for that restoration grant fund so that we can do this work all over the Hudson Valley. So this is the how did we put this pollinator action guide together? So we first, of course, it starts with the pollinators, and I'm going to spotlight a few of our at-risk pollinators from the Hudson Valley bioregion. So landscape interactions, along with some of those other science institutions that I mentioned, selected a list of about 100 at-risk target native pollinator insects, all native to the Hudson Valley. Then we went from pollinators to plants. So we chose a list of about 150 native plants that will support those target pollinators. And then Landscape Interactions again created landscape designs for installation using that target plant list. And those landscapes were actually installed at our 4 case study sites, along with some citizen science and some research science to document the pollinators that were present before we put in these supporting plantings. And we plan to follow that up with post surveys to see if the actual impact of this work. And we've documented all of this, and that is what we are going to share with you without further ado in the Hudson Valley Pollinator Action Guide. And this is an online tool. It can be accessed at pollinatehv.org. So if you want, you can type this link right into your browser right now. You can pop off the Zoom and just go cruise around on your own, or you can stick with me for that little walkthrough and orientation to the action guide. And this is what is in it. I'm going to touch upon each of these 4 sections in turn. But we start with background. So if you are totally new to this, this is sort of our more narrative section, place, plants, and pollinators. Why is all this work important in the Hudson Valley? Who are the pollinators? How do the plants support them? Who are the plants? Then we get really into the meat of the how-to guide. So everything from soup to nuts, planning your project, selecting your site, doing your site preparation, your installation, and what I think is really important, management. Then we have documentation of those case studies. And then just because it wasn't enough already, we have additional resources for you to dive in further, and also some quick start resources just to take to the nursery maybe this weekend. So, like I said, I'm going to give a quick overview of each of those, and I am going to start with place, plants, and pollinators. So everyone, I'm sure, recognizes this. This is our exquisite Hudson River, and like Bob mentioned, we PCA work in the Hudson Valley bioregion, so that is the Hudson River watershed. And this is a really, really special, unique place, which you can read all about in the guide, the reason why. And we have many native pollinators to this region. So many of them are not doing so well. Again, gonna go light on the gloom and doom, but we know that our pollinators are in dire need of our support. Probably everyone knows what a pollinator is, but just in case, anything that carries pollen between flowers and helps plants reproduce can be a pollinator. That does include things like birds, hummingbirds, bats, certainly wasps, beetles, and flies, but I have bees, butterflies, and moths here in bold because those are the pollinator species that we have chosen in our target pollinator list. And one thing that I want to just mention here, which might be a little bit newer to some folks, is that we sometimes divide pollinators into specialists and generalists. So specialist pollinators, here we have the monarch butterfly. That is one of our most classic specialist pollinators. I think we all know it can't reproduce without the milkweed plant. So it's a specialist, or its caterpillars specialize on milkweed. And many of those specialist pollinators that need certain plants for their survival are kind of extra at risk and extra in need of our support. We also have generalist pollinators who can use more plants than just one or two. They also often have special conservation needs, which I will get to. What are some of their threats? Most of us probably have heard, of course, pesticides are a really big problem. They just straight up kill our insects. Habitat loss is a huge one. I think the statistic is something like 140,000 acres in the Hudson Valley bioregion have been lost to development in the last 20 years. And of course, it's worse across most of the continental US. And I'm talking about habitat loss, both for roads and houses, but also agriculture is a huge one. We continue to develop our natural areas. We've got to work on that. And the picture that I chose here, everybody probably recognizes deer overpopulation is actually a huge threat to our pollinators because deer as a native species decimate the native plants that they need to survive. And that means there's not enough to go around for our birds and our bees and everyone else. So sometimes folks will say something like this, and this is one thing that I said when I first started learning about all of this native pollinator stuff. So again, not a pollinator expert, except in as much as I've learned through this project. Sometimes we'll say, wait a minute, there's a lot of bees out there. Well, yes, there are a lot of bees, but I'm willing to bet that most of them are one of these two things. So on the left here, my left, we have Bombus impatiens. That's a common eastern bumblebee. And this is the vast majority of bumblebees that you're going to see in your yard. It is a native. It's a generalist. It can forage on almost anything. And it's most of the bees that we see, except for the one on the right. And that is our honeybee, Apis mellifera, which is not a native bee. So it is not an important conservation target for us. Honeybees play about the same role in our ecosystems as sheep or any other agricultural animal. I am not disparaging honey. Certainly I love it. But they are not, they've kind of stolen the spotlight from a lot of our native bees for a while. So we're going to take away some of that spotlight today. Here we have a honeybee foraging on a native aster. This can actually be a problem. So if we have lots and lots of honeybees and not enough plants to go around, they can sort of preferentially forage and compete with our native bees, which is not a good thing for our native bees or our butterflies or anything else that uses those flowers. So some of you, I think, were here when we had Matt Schlesinger, Dr. Schlesinger from the New York State Natural Heritage Program, did a wonderful presentation last spring about the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey, which just came out last year and found that depending on your criteria, up to 60% of New York State's native pollinators might be at risk of extinction. So their populations are declining. That's really bad news. Again, there's lots we can do. And I will have a good news counterpoint here that I couldn't say then because this just happened. I think a lot of you probably worked on this as well. The New York State Birds and Bees Protection Act, which just passed the governor's desk, will ban neonicotinoids, which are the worst pesticide or one of the worst, by 2027, which is coming right up. So that's fantastic. That's a big way we can go towards supporting our pollinators, but there is much more to do. And what our pollinator action guide is going to focus on is the native plant component of all this. So we know that our pollinators need native plants for food, for shelter. So pollen, nectar, host plants is really key. We have oil collecting bees that need oil from certain flowers. We've got to bring back the native plants. And so our hypothesis here is we start restoring those plants and those habitats, we're going to support the pollinators. And that brings us to the pollinator action guide. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a target pollinator list. Who do we want to support? This is about 100 species selected again by Landscape Interactions and Molly Jacobson, a wonderful ecologist from SUNY ESF. If you check out the website, the screenshot here shows you a little bit of a overview of some of the more common groups that we're focusing on. So we do include some what we're calling moonshot species. So some of these pollinators are still around, but they're starting to decline. Some of them are farther along in their decline, and some of them are really only known at this point in the historical record or are very, very rarely seen. So we're not sure, this is all a big, hopeful experiment. We don't know if we're going to be able to bring some of those pollinators back, but we think it's worth trying. Of course, there are many hundreds, if not thousands, probably thousands of pollinators that we didn't include on this list, especially those lesser known pollinators like wasps and beetles and flies and birds and bats. But we all know that planting native is going to support really the whole base of the food web and hopefully lots of those other pollinators too. So I just want to, as Bob said last time we talked, I want to humanize some of these pollinators a little bit of the Hudson Valley. And the one I picked to represent our butterflies is the Carner Blue. This is one of our moonshots, as well as one of the most famous specialists. If anybody has been up to the Albany Pine Bush, it's actually their Lupine Festival right now. It's going on all month. You can check out the blooming lupines, and a Carner Blue might even land on your shoe, which it did to me last time, which was really awesome. They are a beautiful, tiny little blue butterfly. And like I said, really important specialist. They can't reproduce without this wild blue lupine, which in turn is kind of a picky plant. It likes to grow in these barren habitats with really sandy soil. So we might be able to bring the Carner Blue to more places. We hope so. We'll try. For the bumblebees, this is my representative. This is one of my favorite bumblebees, and it lives up to its name, the golden northern. It's huge. It's bright gold. It is not a food or a host plant specialist, but what this bee does is make a little nest in the ground and line it with grass. And I actually just learned they bring in like goose poop and other little things to make their nest really soft. It's one of our most efficient pollinators, so much more efficient than a honeybee. They actually can work themselves to death just by how efficient they are at pollinating, so we really don't want to lose this one. It's threatened by agriculture, tilling, clearing, anything that really disturbs the open grassy habitats where it wants to make its nest. So we have lots in the guide about how to support it with plants and also how to recreate some of those habitats. And then our moths. So many moths, of course, are active at night. They're a little bit lesser known, maybe less charismatic, although I think many of them are beautiful, including this one, the waved sphinx moth. This is not a single species specialist, but it does have plant needs that are specific. So the adults of this species, scientists think they don't actually eat anything at all. So they don't need plants to survive, but the caterpillars certainly do. And one of the main plants that this moth hosts on is our ash tree. And we know that our ash trees are being lost due to the emerald ash borer. But luckily, it can also use oaks and other trees. So if we start bringing back some of those beautiful native tree species, we might be able to support this moth. So again, this is only 3 out of 100 targets, and the 100 targets are only 100 out of uncounted thousands. So go check out the target list and start diving into native pollinators. And that will bring me to how we think is the best way to support these native pollinators, and that is with plants. So like I said, we chose the pollinators, then we chose the plants. Thanks again to all the scientists who found out all of the specific plant-pollinator interactions. The action guide plant list that we host in the guide has about 165 total species. Most of them are native directly to the Hudson Valley, and they all have range notes about exactly where their native range is. And it's everything from trees down to flowering perennials that we often think of, plus grasses and sedges, which can be really important host plants, biennials, and even annuals. They provide nectar, pollen, or their host plants, and many of them are multiple of those things. So many great plants out there to choose from. Now, how do we offer this as both a complete list and as quick start curated lists? And I'm going to start with the quick start lists, which look like this. Thanks to Eli Shear, a wonderful graphic designer who designed these lists for us. These are curated, so this is just an example of our Plants for Full Sun Gardens list. This isn't every single plant on our big list that could work in full sun, but these are some of our favorites for gardening. You'll see on the left here all of our different lists, so you can choose one of these that best fits the conditions that you're working with and roll on down to your native nursery, which I will also talk about how to find a good native nursery, and just start picking a few from these lists. However, if you're starting from scratch or you're like, I need more, we have our complete plant list, and I'm calling this for experts and enthusiasts. Don't be intimidated. It is just a spreadsheet, and it's pretty cool to kind of navigate around this once you sort of get the hang of it. So over on the left, we have plant information, and every row is a plant. The plant names are linked with their range info. And then over on the right, we have the pollinators. So one pollinator in each column, and you can read down the column and over on the row to see what plant provides what type of services to each pollinator. And if you're a landscape designer or you're working with a landscape designer, we really recommend, using this complete plant list for them. And just think everybody should check it out because science is awesome. So you've got your plants. You are now ready to dig in and take action. And that is what we're all about here. So this is the action section of the action guide. This is the how-to guide. And this one, before I tell you what's in it, I just want to back up a little bit and say sort of what type of landscape are we all thinking about restoring here. So if you have already the privilege of stewarding a landscape that is full of native plants or even sort of quasi-natural, you might want to step back and sort of think about how you can steward what you already have. What we're going to talk about is how to transform landscapes back to natural or back to, ecologically rich that have already been really heavily impacted by humans. And that is primarily these three types of landscapes, all of which are abundant in the Hudson Valley. So lawns, I think everybody knows about the Kill Your Lawn movement. The middle one might be a little bit more of a surprise. That's a hayfield. So I know a lot of us have maybe just big spaces that we don't, maybe not a lot of us, but some of us have big spaces that we don't know what to do with. And I see a lot of these fallow fields just getting mowed because that's what we think needs to happen. Just mow a fallow hayfield or, just keep the land open. That actually suppresses a lot of native plants, favors invasive non-native European grass species, and it's a really great candidate for restoration for pollinators. And then on the right here, of course, agriculture. So this is a little bit of a complex one, and certainly there can be wonderful ecological agricultural systems, but we also have a lot of conventional ag still here in the Hudson Valley, and there are some really great opportunities for transforming that partially or indeed fully. So in the how-to guide, that's where we start with planning your project, selecting your site. We have a chapter on designing your project, along with a lot of resources, because we are not design experts, but we can tell you where to find such folks. And then a little bit about choosing your plants and matching them to your site. So again, back to those plant lists that we just talked about. So then into the real boots on the ground. This is the first time you're like out in your field. And we are gonna have lots of good mini chapters in here about how to prepare your site for planting. And we are talking about planting either seeded meadows, which this is in preparation for a seeded meadow, or gardens. So, starting a new garden bed from your lawn or starting a meadow from your lawn. And the third type of project that we're talking about is woody hedgerows, which are really important, especially for providing host plant services to our pollinators. So we have really detailed instructions on 3 different site prep methods: smothering or tarping, I think many of us are familiar with; repeated tilling, which is the one we just saw; and then we do cover herbicide, which I know is very controversial, and I know there are probably folks on this call that would never ever want to use herbicide, and we absolutely respect that. However, it is a really common restoration tool, and it was recommended by our designer for use in some very specific situations among our case studies. So we do provide information about, how to find a professional, which is critical anytime you're even considering herbicide, and sort of ways to do the least harm, because again, very common restoration tool, especially in this age of many invasive species, which can be harder to eradicate with some of these other means. So from there, one of the really fun parts of putting in a project like this, a garden, a meadow, or a hedgerow, is sourcing your plants. And I said I was going to mention native nurseries. So one of the big resources in the Pollinator Action Guide is a native nursery list, which is another spreadsheet that you can sort by location, by type of plant that you're looking for, whether it's seed or bare root or container, local ecotype. And we have a bonus chapter in there about how to not spread jumping worms around the Hudson Valley more than they already are as you're going through your nursery sourcing process. So that's another thing. I could probably stay on the jumping worm slide for a while, but we'll skip lightly over those and talk about two really exciting parts of this guide. So plant sourcing, the nursery list is going to be really good if you're looking for container plants or plugs or bare roots, anything to add to your garden or to your hedgerow. If you're doing a seeded meadow, which again is one of the habitat types that we're really interested in restoring, you need a meadow seed mix. And I am so thrilled to say that PCA worked with Ernst Conservation Seeds, which is based in Pennsylvania, to create custom native seed mixes based on our plant list. They include mostly pollinator supporting species from that plant list, but also some additional native species to make a really well-rounded, like sustainable meadow composition. So these are available for download on our Pollinator Action website. Quick disclaimer, of course, as a nonprofit, we don't specifically endorse any for-profit business, and it's absolutely possible to take this seed mix to a different seed company and ask them to fill it. We just happen to work with Ernst, and so there are ordering instructions there and also instructions for how to order elsewhere. And more seed work. This one's really exciting, and I think we're going to probably have to do a whole separate session on this project because we have lots and lots to say about it. But I think most of you may recognize the beautiful art pack seed packet on the right here, which is the classic seed packet from Hudson Valley Seed Company. And PCA has been privileged to partner with Hudson Valley Seed Company and a wonderful nursery out of Danbury, Connecticut, Tiny Meadow Farm, to do local ecotype seed propagation. So we selected some species from our plant list, and we are doing ethical, local wild seed collection and then propagation so that we can preserve those local plant genetics, which are the best for pollinators, as well as, a really important part of stewarding our diversity. And the first of those local ecotype seeds in the Pollinate HV collection are going to be available later this summer. So stay tuned, both for us and Hudson Valley Seed Company. Super excited about that. Okay. So you've got your seeds, you've got your plants. We now in the guide cover how to install your project. So this is one, I'm sort of starting at the biggest scale and I'll go down to the smaller scale. This is a native seed drill installing a seeded meadow at our Gallatin case study site. And we cover how to find a native seed driller. It's a little bit of an uncommon piece of equipment, and how, timing and cost and everything you might need to do this if you're working at a few acre scale or larger. If you're doing a seeded meadow at a smaller scale, we cover hand seeding, when and how to do it. This is from our gardener case study site. And then of course for gardens, or if you're like running a volunteer planting, we just have a little mini chapter on best practices for planting, trees, shrubs, perennials, everything that is beautiful. Okay, so the last chapter in the how-to guide, I think I said this already, is maybe one of the most important, and that is about managing your landscape. So I often say these plantings are not sculptures. You are not putting them in the ground and walking away, and they're going to stay the same forever. Again, especially in these days of thinking about invasive species and deer impacts and other challenges that we face. So we get into how to manage your landscape so that pollinators can be supported all the year round. For example, by leaving stems standing in your meadows or your gardens over the winter like this. Managing weeds and invasives so that you do not end up in this situation. On the left here, this is smooth brome grass, a really common and very pernicious European pasture grass that can really mess up a meadow. And then we have a little mini chapter, and I'm talking about maybe a page worth of content when I'm saying mini chapter, on how to mow your meadows, because that is a bit of a different strategy than you might be used to from mowing a lawn or indeed mowing a hay field or a fallow field. So again, if that's not enough, the website hosts many resources. There's a resources page where all of our downloads are collected. So that's the plant lists, both the complete and the quick start, the nursery list, the landscape designs, which I'm just about to get to, that pertain to our case studies, and then the meadow mixes that we created in partnership with Ernst. Plus we have a nice page with books, our favorite plant identification apps, other tools. We call this kind of our editor's pick section, how to go deeper into the Hudson Valley habitat, native plants, and pollinators, because even though it feels like we've probably covered everything there is, there's way, way, way more that can be learned, and we encourage you to go deeper in all those ways. Okay, so this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to give you a little brief overview of the case studies, which were planned back in 2022 and installed last year in 2023. So we have 4 of these case studies. They all received beautiful landscape designs from Landscape Interactions, and then the case study site owners, were responsible for making the site preparation and installation happen. And as you hear me go through these, think about, oh, maybe which one is closest to your site, and maybe that's where you want to start when you first load up the guide. You know, it's a nice way to just skim through how others have done it, not reinvent the wheel as much. In each page, you can download the landscape designs. You can see really, really detailed information about how site prep was done, project budgets and timelines, where did materials come from, how did labor work, what was the timing of everything, and then we have some mini interviews that share those lessons learned so that, again, less reinventing of the wheel and more action. So I'll start with the Gardner case study. And I think the site managers are on the call, so thank you to them for making their beautiful home available for this really, really exciting work. So in Gardner, this case study took place along the Wallkill, which is the blue. This is a gorgeous drone photograph taken by our photographer, Adam Dean. We installed a riparian buffer. So I'm going to just flip back and forth. This is in the growing season. This is in the winter after all the leaves were off the trees, and you can really see the steep shoreline of the Wallkill, which is a pretty crazy little erosion spot. And as we look to the future and climate change and more extreme storms, we want to see more riparian buffers and more shoreline stabilization all along the Hudson River. So we did a riparian buffer that included planting lots and lots of trees and shrubs, which are good not just for stabilizing the soil, but also for providing food and shelter for pollinators. This was done in conjunction with the DEC's Trees for Tribs program, who I have to say are just as much of a delight to work with as they look like in this picture. So if you haven't heard about Trees for Tribs and you have any land along a creek, or you manage any land that's along flowing water, definitely check it out. It's a great way of getting free trees and shrubs to plant, to support, again, prevent against erosion, and in this case, support pollinators. And actually, this was the first time that Trees for Tribs had done a project like this, and they're really excited to do more like custom projects that have that dual purpose for pollinators. Definitely check out Trees for Tribs. Now, here we are planting that. It was very rainy, but everyone was still very happy, which is nice. We also did a deer fence around this riparian buffer in addition to the tree tubes. So an electric stranded wire deer fence. If you're interested in deer fencing protection, check out this case study. In this same Gardner case study site, we did 2 seeded meadows, one in a sun and one in part shade. So here we are in the winter after the site prep had been completed. Here's the site prep that we did. It was smothering. So if you're interested in tarping, we have really good descriptions of tarping in this case study, and we did hand seeding. So here I want to just shout out to Wild Ones Mid-Hudson Valley. I think we have some of them on the call as well. Could not believe the strength and energy and positivity of this group, which I think was just started last year during the case studies. They brought out dozens and dozens of volunteers for the planting days and for the site prep days. They were really good energy, even in that really rainy planting day. And if you are in Ulster County, or if you're on the west side of the river, I highly recommend getting involved with Wild Ones, because they are a great native plant group of folks. Okay, so that brings me to the Gallatin case study, which is, well, it's in Gallatin, if you don't know where that is, Columbia County. And this was a larger seeded meadow, so a 3-acre seeded meadow that was prepared with repeated tilling. So if you're interested in that type of site prep technique for a larger space, check out this case study. I added this additional photo here on this slide because the site owners want me to share that if you're interested in repeated tilling in Columbia County, you're going to be picking a lot of rocks, but that doesn't necessarily mean don't do it. So check out tilling as a site prep method in Gallatin. Cover cropping, here's that same field under a cover crop of winter wheat last fall. And native seed drilling with, again, that Truax native seed drill is all documented in the Gallatin case study. Another cool part of this case study was that the site owners chose to do a little bit of ethical local wild seed collecting from other areas on their same land. So here one of the site owners is collecting little blue stem grass to be seeded as part of that meadow mix. So if you're interested in seed collecting or wild seeds, check out our meadow mix page as well as the Gallatin case study. So the Kingston case study, dear to my heart as all of them are, is the Kingston YWCA, and this one might be of interest to most folks who are looking at doing more of a home scale garden type of project. So we did 3 native garden beds here in Kingston. This one turned from this barren soil by this beautiful mural into a really gorgeous sort of shady system of mountain laurels and lowbush blueberries. And I think this is Paccara. Lots of gorgeous flowering plants added by the door where the preschoolers go in for their classes. And we added another bed here at the front of the building that originally just had some sort of annual pansies. That is the emotional support dog, Jupiter. She works at the YWCA. She's great. And we added lots of great native plants to this bed as well. And we did, I think we did another one, but I don't have pictures of it. So check out small size sort of urban or home scale garden beds at the Kingston case study. Now, our last study, we thought the pictures couldn't get any more beautiful, but they just keep getting better. So our final case study here in Red Hook, we worked with Bard College to do our largest of all the seeded meadows on this 12-acre field that is kind of overlooking the Hudson River. And if you are in Columbia or Dutchess County and you go to the Montgomery Place farm stand, this is the old Montgomery Place orchards, recently acquired by Bard, and really could not have been a better use than to turn it into this great pollinator oasis. So this is what the field looked like before we did this work. It was an old cornfield and it was just full of basically standing dead corn stalks, non-native weeds, and not that great stuff. This is the field that was treated with herbicide as a site prep method, and that was recommended by professionals because it had already been, so devastated by decades of conventional agriculture, and it was like one final treatment. So if you're interested or curious or morbidly curious about herbicide, check out how we did the Red Hook case study. It was also drill seeded, the seeded meadow with that Truax native drill seeder. And then we had beautiful additional woody hedgerows that support lots of pollinators with host plant services and more flowers. Thank you to all of the Bard students that pushed for making this project a reality and then even came out to help do the planting. It was really wonderful. Here also we have an example of deer protection on a slightly smaller scale. So if you're interested in like how to do caging and how to protect some more specimen trees, check out that Red Hook case study. So those are the 4 case studies that we have now, but we don't want to stop there. So this year's Ecological Restoration Grant Program that I mentioned earlier is going to include a pollinator health track. And we would love, love, love to see more folks doing these projects, basing this work on the recommended plants and the recommended seed mixes and the recommended site prep techniques and installation protocols, everything here in the Pollinator Action Guide. So if you are interested, I have a slide coming up that tells you how to sign up. And of course, as Bob mentioned, we are looking for support for this work. I think it's really one of the best ways to, participate in making a joyful and a healthy future. So much of climate work can feel really hard and really heavy, but this ecological restoration work is great for biodiversity. It's great for building community. It's super fun. This is one of our pollinator project ecological restoration grants from last year. So separate from the Pollinator Action Guide, but this is New Paltz Middle School students who all came out to hand seed a pollinator meadow. More of this, let's make it happen. Even if you're not in the grant program, we'd love to document your project. So if you are a landscape designer or you're working with a designer and you use our plant list or you use our techniques, we'd love to see your design drawings and use them, share them to inspire others. Even if you don't have designs and you'd like to send in some photos of your project, we'd love to see that too. We want to be, in open communication, see how you use this this resource and see how we can make it better to support you. So here we go. Let's stay in touch. We think of this pollinator action guide really as a living document. So check it out again at pollinatehb.org. There's a contact page there. If you find a broken link or something, let us know, but also tell us how you're using it. Tell us what, you think would make it better. You can email me directly with questions or comments, or to share your project at avalon@climateactionhb.org. The contact form on the site also comes directly to my email, so I will see it. If you are interested in supporting our ecological restoration grant work, please get in touch with Bob. He's wonderful. He'd love to talk to you. And if you're interested in potentially signing up for being notified when we launch our grant program, check out our main website, climateactionhv.org. I wanted to put the slide in to thank everyone who was involved with this project again, but I'll just say this took many years, many people, so much expertise, so much generosity and time, and so many volunteers, and just so much kind of beauty of human collaboration and experience. So thank you all who participated, and thank you so much all who are here now. And I hope that you enjoy, and I hope that you get out there. So now I can take questions.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much, Avalon. You're really wonderful. And all of us at Partners for Climate Action, we honestly, when we met you, when I met you, I felt like, the stars were just lining up for us to be able to support this work. And you have been just an awesome shepherd of this work. And yeah, it's really thrilling. And we're grateful to you. I want to say something else before we turn to the Q&A. Just if you notice, you're looking at all these beautiful photos. One of the things that also inspires me about this work is you see the number of young people that get involved in these projects. There's so many reasons for young people to be worried about the future. And what I find about the pollinator work, it's really one of those ways that's just attractive to young folks. They want to roll up their sleeves and get engaged. And we saw a lot of that. And I just think it's very hopeful. So we've got about 15 minutes or so. Folks have been putting questions into the Q&A, so I'm going to be looking at that. Again, I want to say if you don't find the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, look over to the right. There's a little circle with 3 dots in it. If you click that, you'll have an option to get into the Q&A. So I'm going to try and get through as many of these as possible. Maybe I'll go, let's see. Here's a good question from Kristen. Avalon, when I talk to people about converting their lawns, they often mention the fear that ticks will increase in unmowed areas. Is that true? And are there remedies?
Yes. Ticks. Boo. So this is a common question. One of the resources that we recommend in the Pollinator Action Guide is a really fantastic book by Benjamin Voigt out of the Midwest called Prairie Up. And all he talks about is lawns to meadows. So we kind of cover many different scales and not just meadows. But if you're interested in like how to re-prairie suburbia specifically, check out Prairie Up, and he talks about ticks. But to answer your question directly, there's a couple of things. So ticks jump off of long stems. So the best way to not get ticks in your lawn meadow is to mow a wide path so that you're not actually like having to brush through really high stuff every time you walk out there. We also sometimes call those paths cues to care. So it's okay to have a meadow that doesn't look like total wilderness in your lawn. There's ways of sort of making a middle ground there that will both be a little bit more aesthetic and not as tick friendly. And I'll say that in our seeded meadow mixes, we actually have the height of all of the plants that are in the species list. So you can sort of re-customize those mixes if you'd like a little bit of a lower meadow. that isn't going to have as many of those trailing fronds. And then I would be remiss to talk about ticks and not talk about deer. So white-tailed deer are the only reproductive host of the deer tick that carries Lyme disease. So if we manage our deer populations, we're going to have fewer ticks, both in our woods and in our lawns and in our meadows in the Hudson Valley. It's a much bigger conversation, but it's something that's being taken up by PCA's Forest Health Task Force right now. So if you're interested in that, you can check out our website and kind of come at it from the much bigger scale. But for an easy answer, I would say wider paths, lower plants, and tick checks. You know, you can also get ticks just in your lawn. It's not going to like skyrocket when you put in a native plant meadow. Oh, one more thing. If you have a native plant meadow, you will have many more beneficial predatory insects and who may actually help decrease your tick population for you rather than just in a lawn. So great question, many possible answers.
Great. Tara Lynn adds tick tubes are a good option for folks to use as well. So here's another question. Will there be monitoring of the case study sites to document progress and help inform future projects?
Yes. Short answer is yes. Longer answer is yes, and it's starting like this month. So we're doing, I think I mentioned we did pre-installation pollinator surveys to check out, you know, which, if any, of the target pollinators were present in the case study sites already. The answer was very few. We're going to follow those up, not this year, because most of the plants that we installed are perennials and they're not going to really be blooming or growing very large this year. But next year, we will start with those post follow-up pollinator surveys. And this year, and for at least several years into the future, we're going to do photo documentation and sort of citizen science level studies of what's growing and how things are going. And we do intend to add those to the case study documentation on the site. I also hope to offer some, didn't mention this, I was hoping to have dates by this talk, but I don't, but they're coming soon. And we're hoping to offer some actual like hands-on experiences at each of the case study sites so that you can check out the progress for yourself, both this year and hopefully into the future.
Great. Reuven is wondering if local nurseries can be encouraged to have special native sections. He notes it make it so much easier for gardens to focus in their incorporation of these species.
Yeah, so here we get into like a little tricky ground because again, that disclaimer of PCA as a nonprofit has to remain impartial and not say, go to this nursery, not to this nursery. So I will say there are many wonderful nurseries around in the Hudson Valley. Some of them are native only, and you can check out the nurseries in the nursery list. There's a separate tab that shows the nurseries that were used by the case study sites. It's a much shorter list, and most of those are natives only. I don't think I will be in trouble if I just mention that a great native nursery just opened in Red Hook, Flower Power, next to the Ozone. And there's another great one in the Catskills, and then Tiny Meadow Farm, who's working with us on the Hudson Valley Seed Company project, is also a great like native only. And most of those also have local ecotype seeds. Can you encourage local nurseries to have a native section? Yes, let's do it. Like that, you know, it's peer pressure. That's what we got to bring to bear here. Every time you go check out at a nursery, talk to them about their jumping worm protocols, talk to them about their native only sections. And I think I probably also won't be in trouble if I say, go ahead and skip the big box stores because you're not going to get too far with those and their plants are never really that happy anyway. So shop local and you'll do better.
Great. Earlier, you were, I guess, drawing a distinction between honeybees and native bees. And question here, aren't honeybees important pollinators, though? Are they not adding something?
They can be, but they're in most cases not as efficient as many native pollinators are. So when honeybees, and again, I'm not a pollinator ecologist, and so if there are any such in the chat, please feel free to jump in. But I think where honeybees sort of importance comes in is sort of in these monocultures of European crops. So this can be a tough thing for honeybees. So like, okay, honeybees are an important pollinator, they pollinate the blueberries. So they get, the hives get strapped onto a truck and taken up to Maine for the blueberry bloom, which is a really short season. And then they get put back on the truck and go to the almond bloom in California. I'm probably getting the order wrong, but honeybees as important pollinators of sort of conventionally managed monocultural crops. Maybe, can we do better than that in general in our food system? Much bigger question. But I'm not so much concerned about agriculture, I guess, in this talk. So that's not the expertise that we're bringing to bear. They're not a super important pollinator in ecological systems. They're not important to native plants because they don't have those evolutionary relationships with native plants. And again, many of those pollinators like Bombus fervidus, my favorite little golden northern bumblebee, can actually be more efficient than honeybees in any setting. So not saying we got to get rid of all the honeybees, but just bring a little bit more of the spotlight back onto the native bees, especially in that ecological context.
Mm-hmm. We have a few questions about engaging elected officials in this work. And then John asks, do you know of any regulations that prohibit converting lawns in the Mid-Hudson Valley, villages and towns? Are there resources that can help with this?
Yeah. That's a really great question. It's not my area of expertise. Another shout out to Kate, who is our sort of policy expert here. And maybe in her coming life post PCA internship is going to work on some of that. I think the best place to start is probably with your town board or CAC, Conservation Advisory Council, or Climate Smart Community, because they're probably best tied into those regulations. I'm not aware of any like draconian anti-meadow regulations specifically, but certainly weed ordinances are a thing in many places. And that can, if we're interested in doing this lawn conversion work, again, that Prairie Up is a great resource. He has a whole chapter about like how to talk to weed control specifically. And I'll just say always bringing in those cues to care. So making your native planting look a little bit more like a garden and less like a wilderness in an urban or suburban setting can be helpful and equally as beneficial to pollinators. That doesn't answer the policy question, but it's something that is certainly on our mind. And I think if there's a second iteration of this guide, that's like the first thing that I would like to dig into. I'd love to see a survey of both anti and pro, pollinator regulations across the Hudson Valley. And if anyone has such to share, please send them to me or put them in the contact form in the website, because we'd love to be able to reshare them out.
Great. Probably time for a couple more questions. Catherine asks, are there examples of particular non-native ornamental plant species that you would especially discourage use of in gardens? Some that might have especially negative impacts on pollinators.
Oh, negative impacts on pollinators. That's a really interesting one. I think butterfly bush is the classic one, Buddleia. So I've heard, this is hearsay, I would have to check the research on it, that it's sort of nutritionally devoid. It's like feeding Oreos to butterflies. It doesn't have the right like nutritional composition to support a lot of our native pollinators, but they come and drink from it anyway. So maybe skip that one, but check my work before you go. And apart from that, I would just say, for goodness sake, avoid invasive species. Like, again, the big box stores are still selling things like barberry, Japanese barberry, privet, burning bush. Some of the worst invasives are the ones that produce lots and lots of seeds that are attractive to birds, because then they just get spread everywhere, especially through our woods. So I guess that's a way that non-natives are detrimental to pollinators, is if they become invasive and they choke out our natives, or they take the place of our natives, then they're just creating a situation where there's less food overall for our native pollinators. Oh, and the other thing I would caution against is cultivars. So this is a point that we make in the guide, and you will sometimes see native plants that have been bred for, more beauty, although of course native plants are the pinnacle of beauty in their natural state, but that's a different aesthetic question. So there's a really common example with echinacea. Sometimes you'll see echinacea that has like double petals, and those double petals actually come at the expense of pollen and nectar. So the plant will be producing less food and spending more energy to produce these extra petals that make it look fluffy. So plant straight natives, not cultivars. certainly not invasives, and maybe go check on the butterfly bush. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, we are at the end of our time. I want to remind everybody, we will be emailing all of you with a recording of this presentation. And I'm going to send these questions to Avalon because we didn't get to answer everybody's questions. So we'll see which one of those she might be able to address.
Yeah.
Finally, check out the website, pollinatehv.org. And hopefully this helps all of us on our respective journeys with planting and improving native habitat in our region. I want to thank Avalon again and again. She's just done an amazing job here, and we're super excited about this. And check out our website, climateactionhv.org. That's the Partners for Climate Action website, to find out more about our work. So I'll say goodbye. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you next time.